Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, world leaders, and distinguished delegates, welcome to New York. It is a profound honor to stand here in my home city as a representative of the American people to address the people of the world. For more than 70 years, in times of war and peace, the leaders of nations, movements, and religions have stood before this assembly. Like them, I intend to address some of the very serious threats before us today, but also the enormous potential waiting to be unleashed. We live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. Breakthroughs in science, technology, and medicine are curing illnesses and solving problems that prior generations thought impossible to solve. But each day also brings news of growing dangers that threaten everything we cherish and value. Terrorists and extremists have gathered strength and spread to every region of the planet. Rogue regimes represented in this body not only support terrorists, but threaten other nations and their own people with the most destructive weapons known to humanity. Authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems, and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II. International criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, forced dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair. We have it in our power, should we so choose, to lift millions from poverty, to help our citizens realize their dreams, and to ensure that new generations of children are raised free from violence, hatred, and fear. This institution was founded in the aftermath of 2 world wars to help shape this better future. It was based on the vision that diverse nations could cooperate to protect their sovereignty, preserve their security, and promote their prosperity. It was in the same period, exactly 70 years ago, that the United States developed the Marshall Plan to help restore Europe. Those 3 beautiful pillars, they're pillars of peace, sovereignty, security, and prosperity. The Marshall Plan was built on the noble idea that the whole world is safer when nations are strong, independent, and free. As President Truman said in his message to Congress at that time, our support of European recovery is in full accord with our support of the United Nations. The success of the United Nations depends upon the independent strength of its members. To overcome the perils of the present and to achieve the promise of the future, we must begin with the wisdom of the past. Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government, but we do expect all nations to uphold these 2 core sovereign duties: to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation. This is the beautiful vision of this institution, and this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong, sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect. Strong, sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. And strong, sovereign nations allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God. In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch. This week gives our country a special reason to take pride in that example. We are celebrating the 230th anniversary of our beloved Constitution, the oldest Constitution still in use in the world today. This timeless document has been the foundation of peace, prosperity, and freedom for the Americans, and for countless millions around the globe whose own countries have found inspiration in its respect for human nature, human dignity, and the rule of law. The greatest in the United States Constitution is its first three beautiful words. They are, "We the people." Generations of Americans have sacrificed to maintain the promise of those words, the promise of our country and of our great history. In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. I was elected not to take power, but to give power to the American people where it belongs. In foreign affairs, we are renewing this founding principle of sovereignty. Our government's first duty is to its people, to our citizens, to serve their needs, to ensure their safety, to preserve their rights, and to defend their values. As President of the United States, I will always put America first, just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first. All responsible leaders have an obligation to serve their own citizens, and the nation-state remains the best vehicle for elevating the human condition. But making a better life for our people also requires us to work together in close harmony and unity to create a more safe and peaceful future for all people. The United States will forever be a great friend to the world, and especially to its allies. But we can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return. As long as I hold this office, I will defend America's interests above all else. But in fulfilling our obligations to our own nations, we also realize that it's in everyone's interest to seek a future where all nations can be sovereign, prosperous, and secure. America does more than speak for the values expressed in the United Nations Charter. Our citizens have paid the ultimate price to defend our freedom and the freedom of many nations represented in this great hall. America's devotion is measured on the battlefields where our young men and women have fought and sacrificed alongside of our allies. From the beaches of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Asia. It is an eternal credit to the American character that even after we and our allies emerged victorious from the bloodiest war in history, we did not seek territorial expansion or attempt to oppose and impose our way of life on others. Instead, we helped build institutions such as this one, to defend the sovereignty, security, and prosperity for all. For the diverse nations of the world, this is our hope. We want harmony and friendship, not conflict and strife. We are guided by outcomes, not ideology. We have a policy of principled realism rooted in shared goals, interests, and values. That realism forces us to confront a question facing every leader and nation in this room. It is a question we cannot escape or avoid. We will slide down the path of complacency, numb to the challenges, threats, and even wars that we face. Or do we have enough strength and pride to confront those dangers today so that our citizens can enjoy peace and prosperity tomorrow? If we desire to lift up our citizens, if we aspire to the approval of history, then we must fulfill our sovereign duties to the people we faithfully represent. We must protect our nations, their interests, and their futures. We must reject threats to sovereignty from the Ukraine to the South China Sea. We must uphold respect for law, respect for borders, and respect for culture, and the peaceful engagement these allow. And just as the founders of this body intended, we must work together and confront together those who threaten us with chaos, turmoil, and terror. We renamed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. And well, if you think about it, after the Second World War, they changed it to defense, right? So we won the First World War, we won the Second World War, we won everything in between and everything before, never lost a war. We still don't lose wars. Sometimes we don't fight to win. You know, we'll stay around the country for 15 years, just bomb the hell out of everybody, make everybody miserable. Nobody knows why we're there.
What they're not telling you about U.S. politics. This is American Global Force. Subscribe and share, because what you're about to hear is not the surface-level story you see every day, but a deeper look into the forces shaping decisions in the United States. A system that appears open and transparent, yet often operates through layers most people never see. And as you listen, ask yourself this question: who really holds power when decisions about the military are made? Is it the elected officials you see on television? Or is there a network of advisors, strategists, and institutions working quietly behind the scenes, guiding those decisions? Because the relationship between politics and the military is not simple. It is built on influence, necessity, and long-term planning. And while political leaders speak publicly about defense and security, the actual planning often happens within departments and agencies that operate far from public attention. And this raises a critical question for you. If military strategies are being shaped out of sight, how much of what you hear is the full truth, and how much is only part of a larger picture? Because the military is not just a tool for defense, it is also a symbol of power and a means of influence. And when decisions are made about where to deploy forces or how to respond to global threats, those decisions carry consequences that extend far beyond national borders. Yet the explanations given to the public are often simplified, focusing on immediate reasons while leaving out deeper strategic considerations. And this creates a gap between what is known and what is understood. And in that gap, questions begin to form. Questions about transparency, about accountability, and about whether the public is being given enough information to truly understand the actions taken in their name. And as you think about this, consider how often military actions are framed as necessary responses to threats without a full exploration of the long-term implications. and ask yourself whether those narratives are complete or whether they are designed to guide perception in a certain direction. Because in politics, perception can be just as powerful as reality. And when it comes to the military, that perception can influence support, funding, and international relationships. And so the first layer of what is not being told may not be a hidden plan, but a selective presentation of information that shapes how events are understood, leaving you to question what lies beyond what is presented and whether there are deeper dynamics at play that are rarely discussed openly. When you hear about military operations connected to the United States, the focus is often on immediate objectives, defending allies, responding to threats, maintaining stability. But what if these actions are part of strategies that extend far beyond the present moment? Strategies designed not just to respond, but to shape future outcomes. And if that is the case, how much of this long-term thinking is shared with the public, and how much remains within closed circles where decisions are made with a broader vision in mind? Because military strategy is rarely about a single event. It is about positioning, influence, and readiness for scenarios that may not even be publicly acknowledged. And this raises a question you should consider. When a military base is established or expanded, what is the real purpose behind it? Is it simply about current needs, or is it part of a larger plan to maintain presence in a region for years or even decades? And if so, why is that long-term intention not always clearly explained? Because understanding the difference between immediate action and long-term strategy is key to understanding what might not be fully revealed. And as you think about this, consider how technology has become an increasingly important part of military planning, with advancements in surveillance communication and defense systems shaping how operations are conducted. And ask yourself who controls these developments and how decisions are made about their use. Because these choices can influence not only military effectiveness, but also political power. And this creates another layer of complexity where technology policy and military strategy intersect in ways that are not always visible. And as these elements come together, the picture becomes more intricate, suggesting that what is presented publicly is often just the surface of a much deeper structure. And this leads to a larger question. If the full scope of strategy were revealed, would it change how people view political decisions and military actions? And if so, why is that full scope not always shared? Because in a system that values transparency, the absence of complete information becomes something worth examining, prompting you to look beyond headlines and statements to consider what might be happening behind them. Every decision involving the military carries a cost, not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of human impact and long-term consequences. Yet when these decisions are discussed publicly, the focus often remains on immediate outcomes rather than the broader effects that may unfold over time. And this raises a question that you should not ignore. What are the costs that are not being fully addressed, and why are they not part of the main conversation? Because when information is limited or framed in a certain way, it can influence how those costs are perceived, potentially minimizing concerns or shifting attention away from more complex issues. And this is where the idea of silence becomes significant, not as an absence of information, but as a selective focus that determines which aspects are highlighted and which are left in the background. And as you consider this, think about how often discussions about military actions emphasize success or necessity without equally addressing challenges or unintended consequences. And ask yourself whether this imbalance affects understanding and decision-making, because a complete picture requires acknowledging both positive and negative outcomes. And when one side is emphasized over the other, It creates a narrative that may not fully reflect reality. And this is particularly important when considering long-term impacts such as regional stability, international relationships, and economic effects, all of which can be influenced by military actions in ways that are not immediately visible. And this leads to another question. If the full range of impacts were openly discussed, would it lead to different perspectives or decisions? And if so, what does that say about the information that is currently being shared? Because in a democratic system, informed decision-making depends on access to comprehensive information. And when that information is incomplete, it raises concerns about whether the public is fully equipped to understand the implications of the actions taken in their name, prompting you to think critically about the narratives you encounter and to consider what might be missing. Power in politics is not static. It shifts and evolves, influenced by a variety of factors, including economic strength, technological advancement, and military capability. And within the United States, the relationship between political leadership and military power plays a central role in shaping this balance. But how often is this relationship examined in detail, and how much of it remains outside public awareness? Because while it is clear that the military operates under civilian control, the dynamics of influence and decision-making can be more complex than they appear, involving interactions between elected officials, military leaders, and advisors who each bring their own perspectives and priorities to the table. And this raises an important question. How are decisions negotiated when these perspectives differ, and what factors ultimately determine the outcome? Because understanding this process is key to understanding how power is exercised and how it affects both domestic and international policy. And as you think about this, consider how the need for security can sometimes conflict with other priorities, such as economic considerations or diplomatic efforts, creating situations where difficult choices must be made. And ask yourself how those choices are communicated to the public and whether the explanations provided fully capture the complexity involved, because simplifying complex decisions can make them easier to understand, but may also obscure important details that influence their impact. And this leads to a broader question. If the full complexity of these decisions were presented, would it change how they are perceived and evaluated? And if so, why is that complexity not always part of the conversation? Because in a system that values informed engagement, the depth of information matters. And when that depth is limited, it can shape perceptions in ways that may not fully reflect reality, encouraging you to look beyond surface explanations and to consider the underlying factors that influence the balance of power. After exploring the connections between politics, military strategy, and the flow of information within the United States, the central question remains: what is it that is not being fully communicated, and why does it matter? Because the idea that there are aspects of decision-making that are not openly discussed does not necessarily imply wrongdoing, but it does highlight the complexity of governing in a world where security strategy and public communication must be carefully managed. And this creates a situation where some information is shared while other details are held back, either for strategic reasons or because they are difficult to convey in a simple way. And this leads to a critical question for you. How do you navigate a landscape where information is both available and limited at the same time? Because understanding this balance is key to forming a clear perspective on the issues that shape global events. And as you reflect on everything discussed, consider how the interaction between politics and the military influences not only national decisions, but also international dynamics. And ask yourself whether the information you receive provides enough context to understand these influences, or whether it leaves gaps that require further exploration, because those gaps are where deeper understanding can be found. And this is why it is important to remain curious, to question narratives and to seek out multiple perspectives, as doing so can reveal insights that might otherwise remain hidden. And as you continue to follow these topics, remember that the story is rarely as simple as it appears, and that the most important questions are often the ones that are not immediately answered. So as we move forward, keep asking what lies beneath the surface and what might be influencing the decisions that shape the world around you. And if you want to stay informed and continue exploring these deeper layers, make sure you stay connected with American Global Force, because this is where we challenge assumptions, explore complex issues, and bring you closer to understanding what is really happening beyond what you are told.